anyone else to join us after this is going to have to play with the dead soldiers at sea. Right, John, let's have you joining us. And anyone who loses connection tonight, I'm sorry, I'm not going to come back for you unless I've got an opportunity to do so. Right, so here we go. Amy, unmute. I can't unmute.
Yes, I am.
Right, okay then. Right, okay. Let's start. Let's get started. This should be a good one tonight because I have a table full of material, so it's quite a lot to get through tonight in an hour. So let's get started. And we should be seeing an image. Hang on, we should be seeing an image now. Counting 3, 2, 1. What are you seeing, John?
I am seeing some rocks and a rough sea. What
else can you see? Can you see anybody down the side?
Yeah, I got bodies down the side, yeah.
But okay, but can you see me clearly?
Yes.
Right, okay then. So you, John, not allowed to interrupt. We're gonna go with a nice flow tonight. We've got 3 stories from my own book, and the book, as some of you will be aware of by now, is called Ghost of Glamorgan. And I'm just going to check one last thing. Just make sure. Right, that's okay. Everything's okay. Right. So we're going to be looking at Marcross tonight. So those that don't know where Marcross is, we will develop the story. And with Marcross, what we can say is that there are so many stories associated with Marcross. This is the place that's known for the Great Gutter, known as the Nash Passage. It's off the South Wales coastline, the Vale of Glamorgan. To give you an idea, Nash itself is between Ogmore on the coast and Llantwit Major. And not to take us away from Nash, the landscape of Nash is within the nice little parish of Marcross. So to sort of set the scene, it's a very naval scene, as I've mentioned tonight, and lots can be said. I sent somebody out with a camera very recently when there was a very, very low tide, and they photographed a 3-masted ship in the distance, which is rather interesting because it said that the devil's 3-masted ship would come from the underworld smelling of sulfur to take those people who have done very bad things in their lives from around the coastline. And we can link this landscape in with a large number of wrecks. Those large number of wrecks, ships that have unknowingly gone onto these rocks and run aground. And then you've got ships that were out there minding their own business. And you've got a southwesterly wind with a storm associated with it. And ships are smashed upon these rocks, drawn to these rocks by those that wish to wreck them. And then you come into stories that some of you will be familiar with, i.e. the wreckers of Wick. What we do know, from 1453 to 1831, 5 ships were deliberately wrecked on the rocky coastline every single year. We know of thousands of lives being lost up and down this coastline. And one key fact is that nobody lived to tell the story of this terrible landscape and the terrible times associated with their ships being smashed up against these rocks. And you know what we're going to do? We're going to give you a terrible story to start off with. One time, sometime in the 1700s, so Mary Trevelyan writes, there was a ship that was wrecked upon very similar rocks to these up along the Nash Gutter, the Nash Sands. And the story associated with that ship is a very tragic story. What we're told is that sheep with a lantern around their neck would be sent up and down the coastline. We've worked this out. Having a sheep with a lantern around their neck wouldn't have worked. So then we worked out that the bullocks would have panniers strapped alongside their side with lanterns in these panniers. Panniers are satchels which you can find on donkeys and horses and even motorbikes. And they would have had 2 lanterns, and these would have went up and down the coastline, and people out at sea, the captains, would have thought that there was a nice harbour in front of them. There would be a nice harbour drawing them in. Unfortunately, these were wreckers with their animals drawing ships upon the rocks, being dragged onto the Nash Sands, completely missing the gutter altogether, smashed up against these rocks up at Scare, and so on. And one story that we have from the 1700s is one lady that managed to survive a shipwreck. She swam to shore, and at this point she was undoubtedly naked, because the best way to swim in connection with a ship being wrecked is to take your clothes off, is because the clothes would weigh you down. And naturally, if anyone has ever been out at sea and they swam and their trunks have come off or their bra has come off, you'll know what I'm talking about. You jump into the sea and your pants come off, right? That's what the sea does. Anyway, she was naked, she swam to the shore, and she was okay, she was safe. It's about 1700. She was going to make it inland. She was going to make it to Lantwick Major. She was going to make it to Cowbridge. She sort of knew the coastline, but there was a wrecker looking at her. He'd spied her into the rocks. And there was another wrecker looking at this event thinking, well, you know, she survived. Best of luck to her. But wrecker number 1 went to her and crept up on her. And what he could see, she had some rings. She had golden rings on her fingers. This is what you would do if you were out at sea back in the day and you were on a ship. The best thing to do would be to wear rings, right? Because those rings wouldn't be taken off you in a storm. They would stay on your fingers. Well, one wrecker crept up on her from behind a rock. He bludgeoned her on the back of the neck. And the story has it that the other wrecker B, witnessed this. And he saw that wrecker A couldn't get the rings off her finger. So he put her fingers in his mouth, right? Couldn't get the rings off. Another finger in his mouth, couldn't get the rings off. He probably realized she was still alive. But you know the best thing to do if you can't get rings off somebody's fingers is to actually bite through the finger. And then she screamed, she yelped out she was still alive. She screamed in agony. So wrecker B said in this story. And he decided to bludgeon her on the back of the neck again. Brilliant. There she is. She goes out again. He did the same thing. Bit her finger off. Extracted the ring. She woke up. And apparently this went on with all 5 fingers as he extracted a ring. And the other wrecker recorded this. And apparently this went on. Every time he had bit a finger off, he took a ring off and she woke up again. And eventually she's now left without 8 fingers and 2 thumbs. She's left bleeding to death from her fingers on the beach. Wrecker B was so appalled by this that he told all the other wreckers there was a wrecker code, and the wrecker code worked. If anyone survived the shipwreck, you kill them, you bludgeon them, you don't let them suffer anymore, you get them out their misery. And there was a wrecker's code along the coastline. Mary Trevelyan tells us that that is a true story. Apparently, when you see white waves around the dangerous sands of Nash, it's believed that these are referred to as the merry dancers of the waves. And when you think about it, each one of those waves represents somebody, a lost soul at sea, just as this hand is reaching out. This itself, as we calm down and I take a drink of my tea. How is this sounding so far, John?
Very good. Yes.
John, I am so pleased for once it satisfies you.
Yes, you're
This,
putting the right sort of emotions in as well.
I
And
like, John, that's enough. You've laboured it now. This is Holy Trinity Church at Marcross. It's a rather interesting church. One of the churches in the Vale of Glamorgan that you can still visit. It isn't shut 24/7. And when you go in there, it's a very unusual church. It's a haunted church. Do you know what? I've got a list of stories associated with Marcross. And one story has it. That a certain lady used to live in the village, and one day she saw something in the church. But that is a story that's actually going to go into my second book on ghosts of Glamorgan. So I'm not going to spoil that one for now. This is a nice little bit of a churchyard. It had a great big churchyard around it at one point. And if anyone's been to the village at Marcross, they will know that there's humps and bumps in the fields. And like many villages, it had its own manor house, which apparently was knocked down not so many years ago. But that is another story. This church is believed to have been established in the 1100s. It's got a very small yard, but do you know what? This is still a church, Holy Trinity Church, in the Vale of Glamorgan, that you can actually still be buried in its yard, which is absolutely brilliant. And you know what? In my notes, I'm missing a story. But we're not going to miss that story. How dare I miss that story? It's a lovely, nice, poetic story. And those who have been with me on my walks will know this story very well. If you go over here, right to that chest tomb, I don't know if you can see the cursor, but you can see on the right-hand side of the porch, on that chest tomb, there's a little story. Now, this is a nice little story, a very rare story, but it's a very eventful story.
It's going on with the cream.
oh,
I did cut mine in half.
John?
I thought nice and what that's too small.
yeah,
John?
I'm here.
I'm going to have to cut your mic a minute because are we going to get any more of that?
No.
Good, that's good. Right, so this story, chest tomb on the right there, chest tomb, next door to the porch, very interesting story. And the very interesting story is that for years, around October time, we think it was, maybe a bit later, same time of the year, about October time, from the 1700s, 1800s, the story continued. It was a story that was told by people in a small village of Marcross. And the story has it that on that chest tomb there, or around that area, a body would hover. A ghostly entity would hover. Wonderful ghostly entity. A kind-looking ghostly entity. But nobody ever approached the ghostly entity. They never asked the ghostly entity what it's doing there. So, as with these stories, there's always a young lad in the village. And the young lad in the village, a teenage lad, approached the villagers and said, "Is this story of a ghost true?" And they said, "Yes, it is." Nobody's ever spoken to the ghost and don't really know why the ghostly entity's hovering there. We don't know why. Anyway, well, the young lad said, "I know a little bit about ghosts, around 1800. I'm going to approach the ghostly entity." And they said, "Okay." The ghostly entity always appears at this time of year and always roughly at midnight. It's always at midnight, folks, always. And then what happened? The gentleman went into the church graveyard, 5 to 12, 4 minutes to 12, you know the thing, 12 o'clock, and suddenly the entity appeared above the chest tomb. He approached the chest tomb in an eloquent fashion, and the ghost peered at the gentleman, the teenager. And the teenager said, "In God's name, kind ghost, why are you hovering above this tomb?" And then the teenager did say afterwards that there was a sense of relief in the ghost's face. And the ghost said, "As you asked so eloquently, in God's name, I will give you a godly answer. My brother was lost at sea in 1588. He was one of the men who tracked down a Spanish man of war along the coast of the Vale of Glamorgan, very near here. However, it's unfortunate that he lost his life. We don't know much more about the story there. He lost his life at sea, probably battling with the Spanish galleon. We know that about 50 Spanish galleons were lost along the British coastline. This may have been one that went off course. There you go. There wasn't as many galleons as people say, but that's another one for historians. And the kindly teenager said, gentleman, he said, well, what can I do to help you in God's name? And the ghost said, you are so kind, my friend. Will you find my brother's body? And the teenager said, now I ask you, ghost, you are a ghost. You can find many things. Why do you need me to help you find your brother's body? Well, because my brother's body is buried outside hallowed ground, it needs to be found by a mortal. I can show you where it is. And the teenager said, well, why don't you dig for your brother's body? But if I may help, I will do so. I cannot dig up earth. I cannot dig the bones of my brother up, but you can. And you may, if you do so, you shall be rewarded. Well, this personally, for me, KARL-JAMES Langford, would have been a wonderful opportunity to dig out just outside the hallowed ground, just outside the wall. So basically, the ghost said, tomorrow night, bring a shovel and a wheelbarrow, and I'll show you the spot where my brother's buried. And they dug. The ghost hovered there and he kept digging, the young gentleman, he kept digging and digging and digging. And by about 6 o'clock in the morning, it has to be 6, by the way, the bones were found. And the ghost said, these are the remains of my brother's mortal bones. And the teenager said, well, how do you know? Well, there's a golden coin. And it happened to be a golden coin with the head of Queen Elizabeth on it. So obviously it definitely was. You may keep that golden coin and it will bring you good luck, that golden coin. There's one last thing you need to do. You need to organize for the body to be buried within hallowed ground, and my ghostly entity will never be seen again. And that's what the boy did. He got the bones reburied in hallowed ground, and he was allowed to keep the golden coin. And the ghost visited him one night and said, actually, because you got my brother's bones buried, I'm going to make sure that you've got good luck for the rest of your life. Keep hold of that golden coin, and whenever you need good luck, you will have good luck. And the boy, the gentleman married, had a great family, had a nice house, and he had good luck for the rest of his days. It's a wonderful story associated with Marcross. I love that one. Moving on, folks. Again, there's lots of views of Marcross, and we will show you where it is. It's going to remain a mystery, its exact location, for the likes of Pam and for Ellie and others that really might not know the area, but I'm sure you do because it's Wick. So another image of the church. What I'd like to do is mention a very special date. And the very special date, for those that may or may not know, is the 1st of May, the Beltane fire to honor Beli, Emperor of the Sun. And this is the same, one of the same, Beltane is the festival of fire. And it's also a festival closely associated with local farmers. And it's also a similar as well with Midsummer's Eve. But Beltane on the 1st of May, it's said that you would burn 2 great big fires, and between the 2 great big fires of Beltane, the flock would be drawn between the 2 great fires, and any horrible beasties that would be on the cattle's, within the cattle's hair and so on, would die. And apparently it was good for the flock. But there's one thing that was outlawed in association with Llantwit Major. It's also said that they would chuck a live calf into one of the fires. And a local magistrate heard about this and decided to outlaw this practice. It's also said occasionally that the cattle herd being drawn in between them would mainly be okay, but occasionally, if you had a flock of sheep, one or two of the fleeces of the flock of sheep would go up in flames, and this was seen to be cruel. So they outlawed this practice, but what they then did to deal with cattle rot on the hooves, for example, they would make the cattle walk above the ashes, which would kill any beasties which would be associated with the cattle's feet, for example. So what I would like to do now, I would like to go to another image, and for once, I'm going to read out of my own book. And you know what? When we read out of my own book, we're going to bring in Sue at the end, because this is a rather interesting story that is very similar to something that Sue told us the other day. And I don't know if you could see it, an image from my own book. Can you see this image, Amy?
Yes, I can.
Nice.
And me.
This is Man on a Bike by Mandy McCourt. A very short story. It's good to have very, very short stories. Here we go. Ghosts suddenly becoming lost from view is very much what this short story of a man on a bike tells us. There is a ghost of an old man on a push bike that rides down the hill from Wick and then past the horseshoes at Marcross. This is that building. And disappears into the barn opposite. So you're looking at the building there. If you stand in that white doorway there and look in front, there's a barn. So that's what we're talking about. So Mandy says, now I was told by my dad, John, once that a road used to go straight up past that barn, and that's where the old roadway used to be, heading easterly towards Lantwick Major. Nobody knows who the old man is, but everything about his ghostly activities has now been forgotten in history. The man on his bike has been seen quite a few times going down the hill, and he looks so real. He's coming from the very haunted landscape of Montnash, that it is often remarked that he has often tipped his hat in recognition as well. That's quite weird. It is how this short story goes. And I know there's a little bit of a smile on Sue's face, but we'll come on to a story at the end. Now, what I would like to do next is put my little book over there, make sure it's open for the other story I would like to tell you about Marcross. There's a bit of a ghostly story, that one, a bit scary. So what I'd like to do next is we're going to go up that lane. And the reason why we're going to go up that lane is that lane that leads, that is the bit of a, so the pub is on the left here. That's the barn there that the man on his bike disappears. That lane is otherwise known as Llan Road, going up between that wall on the left and that building on the right. It's known as Llan Road. And it's believed that occasionally there's an entity of a man being chased down this lane. And it's also said that if the entities are really, you know, powerful, you can see the man being stabbed to death. Quite a very powerful, terrible story, that, a man being stabbed to death. And apparently, if you do see a man being stabbed to death, he runs down that lane, Llan Road. He turns left here in front of that wall, and there's a little gate. And he's stabbed to death in front of that gate opposite the pub. And you know what? I've got to tell you another little story here. This is also in my next book. It's a story associated with Keita, who used to work in this pub. And Keita apparently used to see a little girl in the pub. And apparently she likes to throw 5-pence pieces at people. Again, little bit more about that in my forthcoming book, probably out next year. Let's go back down to Land Road again, if we can move. Now, Land Road, this is rather interesting. If you go down Land Road, there's a well, and that's a rather interesting well. And apparently it was still, you could still see it about 40 to 50 years ago, and it had a bit of a roof on top of it, but it's very difficult to find now. I think everything's collapsed in. By the way, behind that little building here, there's the remains of a grange, the grange associated with Marcross. The well, a story about the well again. It's known as the well of eye afflictions. There's a story that goes, for the itch, the stitch, rheumatic, and the gout, if the devil is in you, this well will take it out. So I think what you need to do, you need to submerge your head or your whole body in the well, and the devil is either taken out you or the devil takes the disease away from you. However which way you would like to interpret that nice little story. Again, I feel that this is a strange landscape. You get the feeling that there's something within this landscape with you. And you know what? One thing I like to do is occasionally tell stories of my own ghost walks that we've had in this area. And I've just got one that springs to mind. So I've just remembered that to write me down, because I didn't think I was going to do that today. We're not going to get through all these stories. Very near here, it's said that there was watchers in the wood.
All right.
And we're not going to look at those watchers in the wood for a moment, because we're going to actually show you, if we can go down, little bit of a plan. These are the woods that we're talking about, okay? These are the woods, the watchers in the woods. Now, apparently, there was, this was the routeway, which was sheltered under these trees, that was known as Donkey Pack Way. Donkey Pack Way, and Donkey Pack Way led all the way into the village. And John, you titter, there's a building that is around here underneath my cursor that actually has an authentic trap door that actually leads from under the building back into this valley, leading into the very dark woodland.
All right.
Which is the landscape known as the Watchers in the Wood. Apparently, you must never go down here, John, at dusk time, because this is a landscape that is very much haunted. And it's said that as people wreck ships, and they would bring the contraband up this Donkey Pack Way, hidden from anyone that was looking from either side, right, into this dusky, weird landscape. And to be honest with you, this is a really interesting image, John and Amy, because when you're in the woods and you can look up at the moon, up to a full moon, you get this impression, you get this sense of darkness, and you always feel you're being watched. And one thing I've got to say is that when we used to have the ghost walks down at Marcross, they used to be very strange walks, because we used to be joined by very small numbers of people, but usually attractive women to boot. Oh, aye, John, exactly. And I remember being told one story that is said that you must never walk along this route at night time and go into the woods, because there are very strange entities in these woods, very dark entities in these woods. So that's where I'm going to bring you away from the lighthouses, and I'm going to bring you to there. Can you see the cursor?
Oh, yes.
One night when we were walking along, imagine you're with me, John, right? And Amy,
Yes.
you're with me. We're going to walk down here, and we've got a little group with us, right? And what happens is John decides he's cut a bit short, right? It's very dark. He decides to go for a whittle by the gate that's there, right?
Never.
Yes, John, never. And Amy's with the group in front.
Okay.
You're with the group in front. And this was a true story. So this one day, John is having a whittle by there. And we're looking back and everybody, you're saying to me, where is John, right? So as I'm walking down the road, right, there's this person runs from here all the way down into the woods. And I shout out, John, you playing silly buggers now, right? And the strange thing is, the next thing I see is John moving back onto the road. And I ran up to John and I say, well, who was that with you? And he said, there was nobody with me. I was having a whittle, right? So the strange thing was, right, we did see somebody running out of the back of John. I'm using John as an example. It was somebody else that night. Somebody runs out the back of John, goes all the way, right? And then I questioned John and I says, did you see anything? And John says, no, I was having a wee, right? And the strange thing is, the weirdest thing is, when we got to that point with EMFs that day, we went to that point with EMFs. And the weirdest thing is that we did feel an entity at that point. We don't know what that entity was, and none of us would go into that wood from that moment onwards. So what we're going to do now, we've done that little bit. We're going to go to here. Now, these lighthouses, the lighthouses are here. You've got the valley here, and you've got a hill fort here, which we'll go on to. So let's go on to these lighthouses. Now, rather interesting, because we're probably going to miss the following fact, right? I am working with a gentleman that's going to be bringing out a book about the Frolic ship disaster. The Frolic went down in 1831 on the Nash Sands. It went down. All hands went down. 80 individuals died that evening, right, at 4 o'clock in the morning. Every single person died. And from 1831, they decided to build a lighthouse here. So they started building that lighthouse over here, and then eventually they built this one at the back here, and it was built in 1832. So there was a major disaster. There were so many ships wrecked along this coastline, nobody could work out why after this one ship disaster, right, the paddle stream of Frolic. The reason why they built the lighthouses is because senior members of aristocracy went down on the vessel. And there was mutes in Parliament. Why are there no lighthouses here? Why are so many ships being wrecked? And strangely enough, from that moment onwards, no ships were deliberately wrecked along this coastline ever again. Ships did go down, but never again were any ships deliberately wrecked along this coastline. After 1831, the moment of wrecking was over. So you feel for that moment, the amount of lives that were lost out at sea. Terrible. I don't know if anyone can remember it. In 1962, exactly the same time that Dufferin House was being pulled down, there was something known as a ship known as the BP Driver went down off this coastline, and this was in 1962. But there's been a few ships going down since. Now, I didn't want to do too much about the lighthouses because you can go and see these lighthouses, and you can get married there, and you can have a honeymoon in these buildings. Wonderful things. Unfortunately, it's not manned anymore. But the Trinity Lighthouse actually does go out and maintain these. It's got a foghorn there. And it's the type of landscape to go if you've just met a woman and you want to get to know her. I've only got one experience of that, and I won't go into any detail. So moving back again, we've been to this image, we've been to there, and we're eventually going to go down here. Now, why are we going to go down here? Now, we're going to go down here because this here is basically on this little bit down in the valley. So we're going to look there. This trackway here is this, right? So you go down the road. Those that want sort of ball bearings, a bit further up is Ogmore. A bit further down the coast is Lantwick Major. A bit further up is Marcross. Inland is Wick. you know the type of thing. So what we're going to do is go back to here. That leads me to Erica. A nice little story. A few years ago, not so many years ago, at the cafe, the owners of the cafe realized that there was somebody down on the coast here with a mattock smashing up a human skull. And it was
What's a mattock?
A mattock is like a pick. A mattock is has got like one flat end and it's got a pointed end. That's a mattock. So he was down there on the beach smashing up a skull, right? So there's a strange story associated with this. I'm going to do a bit of archaeology because John always complains I never do any archaeology. So there we go. So we were called out as a response team. We went basically down there straight away and we recovered some bones. And we decided on the following Monday to recover a full set of human remains. Amazingly, that's what we did. Amazing, but we didn't get much of the skull because it had been smashed up. So we were quite gutted. However, interesting enough, the owner of the Nash Point cafe there said, I've got some human remains in a bin bag, right? You can't make this up. And I said, well, where's the rest of the skull? And he said, well, the police took some human remains away with them. A few days later, I had a phone call from the Ministry of Justice. The Ministry of Justice said to me, I understand you've got some human remains from the coast. And I said, yes. They said, have you got a license from us to recover these remains? And I said, no, I want a retrospective license. So they gave me one there and then. And then they said, have you got all the human remains? And I said, no, I do believe the South Wales police have some of the human remains. And I said, why is that then? Well, the police had to take these human remains away from somebody who'd been smashing up the skull with a mattock. And then the woman in the Ministry of Justice said, why did you allow them to do that? And I said, hang on a minute, I've got no authority over the police. And for the first time in my life, somebody said, actually, we've got more authority over the police. You will be handed the rest of the human remains. So I thought, really? The next day, Mandy, who's one of our members, who had first reported this to us anyway, she had a knock on her door by a police sergeant. And the police sergeant said, I've had these bits of human remains on my skull for the past few days, didn't know what to do with it. I had a woman give me a call from the Ministry of Justice who ordered me to give them to KARL-JAMES LANGFORD.
Wow.
That's an amazing story, isn't it?
Absolutely.
A police sergeant being ordered to give me, so basically, and that any human remains that are found, you've got to keep all the human remains together. It's a legal requirement. You've got to keep them all together. So this is exactly what happened. So we've got all the remains. We're still working on them, and hopefully we'll be able to tell you more. Can I give you a few little bits of insights? We do actually believe that Erica, and that's the name we've given Erica. We do believe that she was a shipwreck victim. We also believe she lived around 1700, and we also believe that she might actually be a slave. And I'm not going to tell you any more, because if I tell you any more, I might have to shoot you all. So what we're going to do, you've had a bit of Erica there, right? So what I want to do there is, I don't know if you can see it, a bit more archaeology. From there, follow the cursor all the way out, all the way back around. That was once a hill fort. All that is left of the hill fort is some humps and bumps here, some humps and bumps going all the way around here, and the rest of the hill fort's been eroded away. And can I do a little bit of interjection? If one of you wants to join me in the next couple of months' time, we will be having some technology. It's looking like we're gonna have a grant to do this, and we'll be filming walks at these localities with me and one other person, and we'll be looking at this type of landscape, and we'll be recording that, and members can actually watch it. So anyone want to visit Nash with me and want to do that, right? Let me know at the end. So this hill fort here is absolutely brilliant. You can't see much from above, but it's a wonderful sense of archaeology. It's said only 1/10 of the hill fort is left. It's more like it's more like 1/5 is left, but most of it has been eroded into the sea. And it's likely as well that in the next 10 years, this hill fort will be completely gone. There you go. There you have it. And the reason why we were working on Erica's remains down here is simply because we needed to recover the remains before they were eroded into the sea and lost forever. Right. Again, looking at that, bring that in just a little bit more there. You can just see a few.
What's the age of the hill fort? Is it Roman, Iron Age, Bronze Age, or what?
Very good question. Very sensible question there, John, for once. It's a hill fort that dates to about 300 years BC. And we've got no evidence that it was ever reoccupied in the Roman period. It probably fell out of use around 50 AD, maybe a little bit later. And basically, the pièce de résistance is that hill forts themselves were abandoned because the new Roman administration said, you don't need to use your hill forts anymore. The landscape is a lot more calmer. You don't need to keep your animals there. I explain about this in Romans in Avela Gomorgan. You don't need to keep your animals there. And basically, lots of hill forts were abandoned, but one or two were reoccupied. And those that are aware of my lectures on a Wednesday evening, we'll be looking at Dinas Powys very shortly. And a certain excavation by Leslie Alcott that John has actually visited with me. We'll be visiting that in the next few weeks' time. So what we need to do, we need to carry on because, you know, we've only got 20 minutes to go, folks. So there we go. So here we go. Another little bit of a map to give you an idea. There's the village. There's Holy Trinity. And to be honest with you, there's not much left of the old village at all because these houses are relatively new. It's likely that this was a proper humping and trumping medieval village back in the 1300s. It probably had a little bit of harbourage, hit by the plague, but the whole population wasn't wiped out. Holy Trinity Church actually remained being used within this wonderful haunted landscape. Do you know what? Rather interesting fact that I always forget on my ghost walks, actually, when I visit the landscape. In the 1540s, for example, the predominant accent to be heard around here is which accent, John? What accent would you hear around Marcross? Can you get this right?
Well, I'm working on it.
Okay,
Would
then.
it be
Go on.
Cardiff?
No, Somerset.
Oh my God, no.
It was recorded in the 1540s because of trade with Devon and Somerset and maybe a little bit from Cornwall, but Devon and Somerset, the predominant accent was the Somerset accent. Amazingly enough, there you go.
Well, don't surprise me, lad. No, I'm not surprised.
It doesn't surprise me at all. Do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to chuck a little story in because to be honest with you, there's about 20 odd ghost stories associated with Marcross. Here's a nice little one. It's said that there was a lady standing around where the cursor is today. And she looked out, and this is about the 1950s, and it said, the mother of Mandy McCourt, she said, that a soldier in full uniform from World War II was seen running down past the church, as this the devil had a rod behind him, running so fast towards the beach that she didn't even get to say hello. And that's a really nice little story. And do you know what? We've got to grab another little story from my book. So here we go. Here we go. So what we've got the story associated with coming down from the horseshoes, walking down from the horseshoes, basically towards the village. And let's read this next little story. So Holy Cross Church is there on the right. You're going towards the sea. There's sort of newish buildings on the left. When I say newish buildings, they're not medieval. So here we go, read directly out of my own book. Often do we regret to record those stories from our loved ones. And when we want to recall them, it is too late. Our loved ones have passed on. Have you ever had that experience, Amy, where you wish you would have asked a question and now they are gone?
Yeah, tons.
Yeah, well, I think we all feel that. You must have one or two, John. Come on.
Well, I know you were talking about people losing the clothing when they were swimming.
Yeah.
I can recall a story when I was heavily into fishing boats and fishing from the Rumney River Club down
Nice.
your neck of the woods.
Nice.
And an old boy in his 80s actually fell off the landing stage and was crying out for help.
Yeah.
And I went out there to try and lift him out of the water and couldn't, because he was wearing a duffel coat and Wellingtons, which was absolutely stupid. And he hadn't got a life jacket either. And 5 of us turned up, and it took 5 of us to drag him out of the water.
And you have just mentioned a wonderful point. It's said, I'll do my little story in a minute, John. You've just mentioned a wonderful point, because the man who's writing the book on the Frolic, Brian Ketch, and it's an archaeology company, a book that he's writing, and he said to me that lots of people drowned on that wreck because they had these big coats on.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what they would do, John, they instead of wearing rings like this girl did sensibly, they would sew up their pockets, and they would have their pockets full of gold. So that would weigh them down, and people would drown naturally. There's a general, MacLeod, right? He was a very senior general. His body was never ever found. It's likely that he was weighed down with his gold. People didn't trust banks then. I don't think we should trust them now. Anyway, we go onto this story. So have we got an image for this? I think we do. Look at that one there. That's our church. That's inside the church there. Okay. So let's do the story. Mandy McCourt. Often do we regret to record those stories, never again to fill in those missing details and become those ghosts that this book describes. One such case that epitomizes the above sentiment is the following short story. Mandy McCourt recalls the ghost scene inside Marcross Church, a story from a first-hand account, thanks to a mum. Mum was in the church at Marcross, Vale of Glamorgan, praying. Mum was alone. When Mum was in the process of prayers, focused in her mind, looking at the back of the pew in front of her, she felt a presence. Mum looked up, and she saw a person stood in front of her. It was a ghostly figure. There is an eerie atmosphere in the church. Alas, my mum is no longer with us, and we were unable to add more to the story. Its own published ghost story haunts the church at Marcross, once told about a ghost that frequented the yard, hovering above a particular grave. And that is a story I've already told you at the beginning. So we've got a little bit still to go through and see if we can do this. White waves. With white waves, as you can see them, this could be a scene that could in fact be the coast at Marcross. White waves were watched with awe, and the old people used to say they were the spirits of the departed who had met their deaths by drowning. And it said people would actually, this is a rather interesting one. We mentioned the merry dancers and so on. And I've got another little point here. Obviously, these being the spirits of the departed. It's said that Christmas, Easter, and All Hallows Eve, people who are drowned in the sea came up to ride over the waves on white horses, crashing on those rocks. And it's also said, naturally, at Christmas, Easter, and All Hallows Eve, people would gather up and down the coastline to watch these waves, and they would wave to their loved ones. I think that's a wonderful little story. It's also said that, I don't know if you've heard this story, John, and I know I've mentioned it a number of times before, that people didn't eat fish up and down the coastline. It is believed that fishes lived on the bodies of the drowned, and it's a reason to avoid eating fish.
I would imagine it's very true and realistic, but
I think it is. It's
yes.
John. There's not so much myths and legend there. I think there's a practical thing, don't you think so? It's more or less.
Yes,
very,
and I can add to it, because
go for it.
Speaking as ex-Royal Navy, I'm entitled to be buried at sea. And what they call the area out of Portsmouth, dare I say it, and it's not very nice, where they've got an allotted area for burying dead Royal Navy seamen. It's called the Crab's Feeding Ground, and it probably very much is.
And I don't think I want to eat any of those crabs. Thank you very much. One thing as well is that with this image, this rather interesting image, we think that what would happen is, out of the coast at Nash, there's a passage. There's the gutter, and then there's the Nash Sands, and the whole thing is that you go between the rocks and the sands itself. You go down the gutter, and this was safe navigation. But naturally, when it's very stormy, it's very difficult to navigate a ship down there unless you know what you're doing. And I'll tell you another little bit of a story, is that another one of our acquaintances along the coast tells me that a few years ago she was looking out to sea. And you know, I mentioned the three-masted ship that we've sort of got a photograph of from a few weeks back for the book we're publishing on the Frolic. And apparently, the three-masted ship had been seen a few years earlier, and it said, "Is this the devil's ship? Is this, as I've explained, the devil's three-masted ship? A ship from the underworld that smelt of sulfur." And the devil placed the souls of people who had died in a very sinful condition, or people who were very sinful up and down the coastline. A big wave would smash them away from the cliff, drag them towards the devil, and he would place them onto his vessel. There's another story there. The devil would count the souls, and basically they would be smashed and broken as little toothpicks on the Gower Peninsula at Worm's Head. All these wonderful things said about the devil. Now, do you know what? I'm thinking maybe, right? Maybe what I would like to do is tell you the little story of Colin Dolphin, because we've got a little bit of time. So you can imagine, this whole sense of wrecking began in 1453. And I will tell this story again when we do St. Donat's, but I feel I want to tell you this because we've got a very watery theme tonight. It's said of Colin Dolphin, a Breton pirate, that he decided to kidnap the heir apparent of the St. Donat's estate, a certain Stradlin. And when Henry was kidnapped in 1453 by Colin Dolphin, he was kidnapped because Henry and his wife Elizabeth was going over to Somerset Way. Colin Dolphin intercepted the vessel in 1453, kidnapped Henry, the crew, and his wife, and basically said to Sir Stradlin, the Lord of St. Donat's Castle, as it was then in 1453, I want you to you know, there was a huge ransom. It was an absolutely huge ransom. 2,000 marks ransom back in 1453. So give you an idea what 2,000 marks was equal to. Probably around £2,000. And if you think about the average wage of somebody back in 1453 was 3 pence, you can imagine how much 2,000 marks is, right? A pound to a mark. So 2,000 marks back in 1453, a huge sum of money. And Sir Stradling decided to pay, to pay this 2,000 marks. He had to sell large estates to raise the money. Anyway, long story short, get to the punchline. What happened was that after 1453, Sir Stradling and his son, after he'd got his son back, decided to deliberately wreck ships in the hope that one day they might wreck the ship of Colin Dolphin. And they made quite a big sum out of wrecking ships out at sea. Eventually, Colin Dolphin was wrecked. He was the only person to survive his ship. He was captured. And the idea about killing everybody who was wrecked along the coast was the rule, because nobody wanted to, Sir Stradling didn't want anyone to find out that he was deliberately wrecking ships, because it would have been a capital offence. You know, he would have been executed, his son would have lost the estates and all the rest of it, right? So that was what happened, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, Colin Dolphin was captured. Colin Dolphin had never ever killed anyone, right? But the fate that Colin Dolphin was to receive was heinous. Down at Tresillian Bay, a bit further on down the coast, a big hole was dug into the rock. Colin Dolphin was weighed down. He was allowed to wear all his clothing. Naturally, John, if he did rise from the rocky grave, he would be weighed down with his clothing, right? So anyway, absolutely, exactly. It's a good idea. So, so the punchline is that a terrible death awaited Colin Dolphin, and we'll say a little bit more about that when we look at the St. Donat's stories. However, this is why, folks. The whole reason why wrecking began in 1453 was because a rich lord was making a great deal of money out of it. He was making more money from wrecking ships as he did from agriculture. And from that moment onwards, everyone caught on to it. Everyone was wrecking ships. And even as late as the 1800s, the Nicol family of Merthyr Mawr was also deliberately wrecking ships.
Good Lord.
Nobody ever survived these. And we'll say a bit more about that when we do St. Donat's in a few weeks' time. So, Amy, can you do me a favour? Or maybe not, because you might lose connection.
No, I'm here.
Are you able to find out what Ghost Walk we're doing next Saturday for me?
I'll have a look now.
Okay, please do. Please do. Right,
Yeah.
so now I'm going to tell you the last story. Okay, this is a nice little last story. So we need to get away from a shipwreck image. We need to go back, and what we need to do is go back to the church. From this road, from the horses, all the way down, and we go to the church. So let's put the church up there. Bingo! Nice. So my last story today about Marcross. Thanks to our wonderful Mandy McCourt. This is a story when my nan, Mary Ringwood, saw a ghost. My nan was walking down the road from the Horseshoe Public Inn, Marcross, towards the church. There's the church. On the right-hand side is the church. This route is picturesque. It is along a tarmac road which is surrounded by countryside with a stream on the west side. After a short while, my nan came around the corner towards the old village church, where on the left-hand side there was an old footpath stile. At the stile, there was a figure of a young girl being stood still there at the side of the road. That's the ghost. Basically, we're talking about, if you go a bit go about 100 yards back towards the pub, right? That's what we're talking about. And what there is a stile. And that's the stile, if you can look at the image. There you go. Nice little stile. Carry on with the story. The stile. There was a figure of a young girl being stood still there at the side of the road. And it wasn't just my nan who had seen the girl, but she had a friend with her. These are not the only two people who have seen the ghost, but others were walking down to the church, are reported to have seen the ghost also quite a few times in the past. The ghost is not seen of the young girl much now. In fact, no one has reported that recently. There is not any backstory attached either to these women. Just a young girl stood by the stile. When we say there's no backstory attached to these women, there doesn't seem to be a connection with these women to the girl. So no one knows the history of the story to why she haunts the locality. Is the girl waiting for someone, a lost lover? Is she requiring to be asked a question from a passerby, just as the Elizabethan ghost of the churchyard at Marcross is waiting? The waiting Elizabethan girl was soon asked a question. This mystery was solved. I got that wrong there. Elizabethan ghost was soon asked a question. This mystery was solved. The one I told you at the beginning. One day, is somebody going to ask the girl the question, why is she waiting the stile? Maybe we will have an answer, but that day needs to come to find out why. And I'm just going to mention one last thing. A few of my notes. Going into the woods. Children avoid going into the woods because they've got a feeling of the dark watchers watching them. I know I've mentioned that with adults, but going into the woods at dusk time is not a thing to do. What we're going to do, we're going to now ask, are there any questions? We're going to cut the image. We're going to bring you all back on board. We're going to unmute you all. And we're going to ask, are there any questions? Any questions to ask, folks?
Yes, please. Where was the manor at Marcross and why was it taken down?
We do believe, when, you know, the church I showed you, it's do believe the houses opposite is behind them.
Oh.
Right. I know, for example, somebody in the Vale of Glamorgan at this minute is saying, oh, I'm demolishing a Norman wall. And I'm thinking, you know, these things happen every day. There's lots of damage being caused to archaeological sites at this minute because we don't have people to keep an eye on these things. In the past, there's monuments that people haven't been able to keep an eye on, and the manor was simply demolished. And this was talking about 50 years ago, it was still standing. So the walls of the manor house are now gone. Any other questions? Ellie?
Can I make a comment, Carl?
Go for it.
As you know, we lived in Retwick for a long time. The girls were brought up there, and one of the properties we had, Brooklands Farm in Wick, was a farmhouse built in the late 18th century.
Yes.
And in the attic space, the purlings for the property were enormous.
Yeah.
They were far too big for you would think, for a normal house.
Yes.
And with a bit of investigation with some of the local people, I was told that the timbers were actually from a ship.
Do you know what? Yeah.
Shipwreck at Monknash. And I can quite believe that. They were oak.
Yeah, yeah.
And couldn't source those locally unless that had been the case.
And do you know what? Well, if you haven't finished the story, sorry for interrupting. I went into a house down by Southern Down, opposite the pub, opposite the Cups. And this lady, she said, oh, I shouldn't have. She invited me and she said, oh, do you want to come upstairs? I've got something to show you. And stupidly I did, but she meant well. I thought my luck was in, to be honest with you. She meant well, and she said, "Look at this," and there were actually proper timbers from shipwrecks in there. It was wonderful. And what you've said, Goff, I can well believe it. And I can give you a number, John. She's called Bev. Any questions before I ask Sue a question? Anyone else want to say anything else? Nope. Okay. Sue, you had something else to tell us about your story, particularly with the bike. What else did you want to say, or was that everything?
Well, no, the cyclist we saw wasn't an older man. He was a young, handsome man, and with sandy-coloured hair and really beautiful clothes.
Where was he again? Tell us the story again. Tell us the story from the beginning. I love this one. Where were you? Give it to us.
We were by Plas Lamihangel, and we were walking towards Siggingston, and he was cycling towards Lamihangel, and he was on a very old-fashioned sit-up and beg style bike. He was wearing beautiful clothes, tweeds, knitted clothes, very handsome, very well groomed. And he said, "Good afternoon, ladies," after he'd sort of tooted his bicycle bell at us. And Bob was still in love with him. It's
I know this is a much older man, right? But if I, can you can't see that image in the book, can you? No. No, it's not up there.
No.
Was he like that?
No.
Oh, actually, he did have a sandy-coloured beard, and he did have a tweed jacket.
That could be him.
Yeah.
Sounds like Alan Keynes.
Oh, we'd would have pushed him off. It was him.
Yeah.
I was talking to Alan today. Thank you very much. So I absolutely love that story. I love that. What I'm going to say is, if any other questions, and Amy, what are we doing next week?
Monk Nash next week, Carl.
Oh my! How is it we've had these two on the bounce? All right, then we're going to have to do Monk Nash if that's what it says, but it'll be Monk Nash Part 1. Because I've got too much to say.
That.
We haven't. We done Marcross today, but we haven't done Monk Nash.
We have.
No, we haven't, John. Stop playing up.
All right.
Right. If there's no other questions, I'd like to remind you we'll be doing the same next week. Those that I'll be seeing in the week in the classes, look forward to seeing you, and obviously next Wednesday. I would like to mention that you know, lots of our members that are isolated without computer technology. We might be getting a grant to actually provide them all with computers.
Oh,
Wow.
Thanks to Vela Glamorgan taxpayers' money and a certain MP, but then again, we don't want to talk about that. So anyway, if there's no other questions, have you all enjoyed tonight?
Yeah, very much.
Yes, thank you.
I've enjoyed it. It's gone very well. It's gone very well. And anyone wants a quick chat at the end, let me know. If not, thank you very much. I'm going to say goodnight to Rosamond, John, Barbara, Sue, Joanna, Karen, Pam, Amy, Ellie, and Goff. Okay, that's fine. So thank you very much. Goodbye. Anyone who wants to stay can at the end.
Night.
Night, guys.
Yeah.
Night.
Night, guys.
Night, guys.
Bye.
Night.
Good night.
Night. Oh, that was good. I enjoyed that one. That worked really well, I believe.
Mm-hmm. I loved it.
Yes. Carl,
Goes very quickly.
you did better tonight with your
Thank you, John.
showmanship, if that's the word.
John, I really appreciate that.
Came over a lot better than previous occasions. You get in there with your showmanship.
Exactly. Rosamond, is there anything you want to say, darling?
Oh yeah, I just wanted to ask about going on the walk. You know, I'm very keen to do walking.
The way it would work, Rosamond, would be You would be my lone Archaeology Cymru student, right? And I would talk to you as if there's a big group of people, and it would be filmed, and we might even do it live, and we would do a recording. But I need to work out what the availability of the technology is from places like Marcross, where the reception is Johnny Depp. But we'll give it a go.
I don't mind coming in on it either, depending on when we can get out of those houses. But,
you could do it with a chitty from me because you'll go into work.
Well, send me a shitty chitty then.
I will, Charlotte. I will. Right.
Yeah. That would be great. Thanks, Carl.
I do that. What I'm going to do, I'm going to have to go in a couple of minutes. So has anyone else got anything they want to ask before I go?
No.
Well, just interested about the Somerset accents. I thought.
Ooh-ar, never know a night like it. Ooh-ar. I am a cider drinker. La 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 la. Yeah, good.
I drink it all of the day.
I drink it all of the day. You are. And my wife has got 43 acres and I've got 48. Oh God. Right. Okay then. If nobody wants to say anything else.
Combine harvester, isn't it?
Oh, that a combine harvester. Exactly. So if there's
okay. On that point, I think I'll say good night.
Good night.
Hwyl fawr.
Hwyl fawr. Diolch yn fawr chi. Diolch.
Right.
Right, and you're going as well, Amy. I will see you soon.
Okay, see you soon.
Night, Amy. Bye. Bye. Thanks for that. That worked well.